I retired from the line in March, and the thing nobody warns you about retirement is that your body keeps the schedule long after the schedule lets you go. I'm 70 years old. I haven't held a wheel at night in over a year, but I still wake up at 3:40 in the morning every morning, in the dark, with my heart already going a little the way it used to go when I'd come up on the long empty stretch past Cochranton and start watching the mile markers. I lie there in a bed that's too big now, and I find myself counting. I don't decide to, it just starts the way breathing starts. And the count is always 4 minutes long, and at the end of it, something in my chest closes like a door, and only then can I go back to sleep. I'm writing this down because the new schedule came out this spring without a certain run on it, and that absence has been sitting in me like a swallowed stone ever since. There was a stop on Route 9 that doesn't have a name. It only ever had a time. 3:50 in the morning, a gravel turnout past the Shelby grain place, out where the corn grows taller than the bus, and there's nothing for miles but farmland and the dark between the steel towns. For decades there was a bus there at 3:50. There was a driver in the seat who knew what to do, and now there isn't. And I am the last man alive who remembers exactly what that means. So somebody should set it down somewhere, even if it's only here, even if not a soul believes a word of it. Understand first that I'm not a man who scares easy, and I'm not a man who tells stories. I drove the overnight out of Erie for 11 years, and before that I drove a delivery route for the better part of 2 decades. And a man who spent his whole working life alone in a cab at night learns to tell the difference between a shadow and a thing. So when I tell you what rode with me on that bus, I need you to know I've turned it over every way a mind can turn a thing, and there's no other side to it. It was real. It was as real as the cold coming off the windshield. It was as real as Donna's hand in mine. I took the overnight because of the money, and I want to be honest about that before I'm honest about anything else. Because I think the money is the part most people don't understand about a life like mine. The overnight paid a differential, 80 cents more an hour plus the late premium, and at the time we were behind. Donna was on the dialysis 3 times a week by then, and the insurance covered the machine and the chair but not the 1,000 things that grow up around a sickness like weeds around a fence post, the gas to drive her there and back, the copays they seemed to invent faster than I could earn them, the special food she was supposed to eat and mostly couldn't keep down. We were $1,100 behind the month I bid on the overnight, and the overnight was the only thing on the board that closed that gap, and nobody with seniority wanted it. That's how most of the big things in a working life get decided. Not by courage and not by choice, by arithmetic. So I drove nights and I slept days, and Donna did her sessions in the late mornings, and for 11 years we passed each other in the kitchen, like 2 people sharing one coat. I'd come in at 6 in the morning smelling of diesel, and she'd be up making the coffee she wasn't supposed to drink anymore, and we'd have maybe 40 minutes where we were both awake, and the world was quiet, and then I'd go to bed and she'd go to her chair. People hear that and they think it sounds lonely, and but it was also the closest thing I've ever had to a marriage I was proud of, because we were carrying the same weight in shifts, and there's a kind of love in that you don't get any other way. She never once told me to quit the nights, even when she could see what they were doing to me, and I never told her how tired I was, because she was tireder, and what would be the point? We protected each other by not saying things. A lot of marriages run on what doesn't get said. Ours ran on it almost entirely, those last years, and I don't regret a minute of it except the minutes I can't get back. The depot was an old brick building off Route 19, the kind of place the city built in the 50s and never once renovated, with a yard out back that smelled of diesel and wet gravel no matter the season. Inside it smelled of old carpet and burnt coffee, and the particular staleness of a building that's been breathing the same air since before I was born. There was a vending machine in the break room that took your money and gave you nothing about 1/3 of the time, and everybody knew it, and we all fed it anyway, and the running joke was that the machine was haunted worse than any road. I want you to hold on to that machine. It matters later, not because anything happens to it, but because it kept right on eating dollars and dispensing cold, bad coffee the whole time. Other thing was happening, and that's the part nobody tells you about the strange parts of a life. They don't replace the ordinary parts. They just sit down right next to them and ride along. The dispatcher on my shift was a man named Pruitt, heavyset, somewhere past 60, gray and slow-moving, with the tiredest eyes I've ever seen on a living person. He'd been at that depot longer than anyone could account for. There were drivers who'd retired before I started who, when I met them at the Union Hall, would ask if Pruitt was still there and shake their heads when I said yes, like they'd hoped the answer might finally be no. He talked in the clipped, half-finished way of a man who'd said everything worth saying years ago and was just running out the clock on the rest. My first night, he handed me the route sheet, the fare box key, and the manifest clipboard, and he ran his thick thumb down the list of stops, naming them low under his breath like a man saying a rosary he didn't believe in anymore. Cockroton, the sheets on 322, the county home, the park and ride out by the lumber yard, standard work. Then at the bottom of the sheet, below all the named stops, there was one more line. Just a time, 3:50. And next to it, where every other entry had a place, there was nothing, a blank. I asked him what the 3:50 was. He didn't look up from the cash drawer he was counting as he said, "You'll come to it, past the Shelby grain place. Cross the first bridge, then there's a second one, shorter. Gravel pull-off on the right just after. You stop there at 3:50. You open the doors. You keep them open 4 minutes by the dash clock, not your watch, the dash clock. Then you close up and you go." I asked him what the stop was called. He said it didn't have one. I asked reasonably enough if anybody ever actually got on or off way out there, where there was nothing but corn and the dark and a leaning reflector post, and that was when he stopped counting. He set the drawer down and he looked at me, and I felt the first cold finger of something walk up the back of my neck, though I couldn't have told you why. "Sometimes," he said, "sometimes somebody rides. When they do, you keep the inside lights on the first setting, the low one, not the bright. You stay in the seat. You don't get up for any reason. You don't take a fare from him and you don't ask him for one. You don't talk to him. And whatever else you do, whatever's on your mind, however bad you want to." And here he leaned in a little, and his voice dropped. "You do not ask him where he goes. You write regular aboard, no incident in the book, and you drive your route. He's got somewhere he's going. The stop's just a part of how he gets there. You're a piece of road to him. Long as that's all you are, you'll be fine." I figured it for one of those union ghosts every old operation has. A stop that got written onto a sheet in 1971 for a passenger who died or moved away, and that nobody ever had the authority or the energy to take back off. Bureaucracies are full of phantom limbs like that. A thing written on a sheet outlives the reason it was written by 50 years. I'd worked for the city long enough to know that. So I said, "Okay, 80 cents more an hour." I said okay, and I meant it the way you mean anything at the start of a job, which is to say I didn't mean much by it at all. The first few weeks I almost forgot the 3:50 was anything but a 4-minute pause in an otherwise ordinary run. And it was an ordinary run mostly in the way the overnight is ever ordinary, which is its own particular thing. You have to understand what that road is like at that hour to understand the rest of it. The towns die one streetlight at a time as you leave Erie. By the time you're past the last gas station, the dark gets real, the country dark that has weight to it, and the only light in the world is your own dashboard glowing green, and the 2 cones of your headlights pushing into the fog. There's always fog out there in the low fields, sitting on the corn like something settling in for the night. The radio gives you static and the occasional fragment of a station out of Pittsburgh or Cleveland that fades in and out like a voice underwater. The heater hums. The glass goes cold under your fingers when you wipe it, cold as a window pane in a house with the power out. And behind you, in the long mirror, your passengers sleep. They're not tourists, the people who ride a bus at 3 in the morning. The daytime world has finished with them for the night. Hospital workers coming off a double, still in their scrubs, asleep before the first stop. Drunks being very polite about being drunk. An old man going to sit with his dying brother. A young woman with a duffel bag and a bruise coming up under one eye who won't look at anybody and gets off in a town with no lights on at all. You learn their faces and you learn not to ask, and you carry them through the dark and you let the sleeping ones ride past their stops a little, and wake them gentle on the loop back. There's a tenderness to the overnight that the day runs never have. Everybody aboard is at the end of something. So am I. We're all just trying to get carried through to morning. 2 of my regulars were nurses' aides from the county home. Women named Rochelle and Patty who rode 3 or 4 nights a week, and Rochelle in particular I came to know a little, in the way you know somebody you only ever see in the dark. She was sharp and funny, and had a laugh like a screen door, and she'd talk to me up by the fair line about her grandkids, while Patty slept against the window. I mention her because she's the one who first told me, without ever quite telling me, that the 350 was real. It started the knowing, with small things, the kind of things you'd never notice if your body weren't already half trained to the road. The first was the clock. Coming up on the grain elevator, the green numbers on the dash clock would hesitate. That's the only word for it. It would sit on 3, 49 a beat too long, 2 beats 3, the way a clock does in a dream when you most need it to move, and then it would catch up to itself all at once. I told myself it was the old wiring. Everything in that bus was old wiring. The second was the radio. The static, which was my one companion out there, would thin out and drop away to a flat dead silence for about a quarter mile before the turnout. Not the silence of a station tune clean, the silence of the speaker itself going somewhere far off. And then past the second bridge it would come back, and I'd realize I'd been holding the wheel a little too tight. The third was the cold. Even on a warm night, even with the engine throwing heat and the heater running, the air near the front steps would turn for those few minutes. A draft of cold coming up the stairwell from outside that had no business being that much colder than the night. You'd feel it on your ankles. I started wearing 2 pairs of socks. And the fourth thing, the one I noticed last because I'd trained myself not to look too hard at the empty turnout, was that some nights the headlights would catch the gravel and the leaning reflector post and the wall of corn, and there'd be a patch right by the door where the light just didn't do anything, where it should have lit the gravel the way it lit the rest, and it didn't, like the light was falling into something instead of off it. I'd open the doors anyway. I'd count my 4 minutes, and most nights nothing came, and I'd close up feeling foolish for the 2 pairs of socks. But the nights the headlights wouldn't catch that patch were the nights the suspension settled. The first time it settled, I wasn't even watching the door. I was looking down at the manifest, doing the math on a fare from earlier, the dome lights low and yellow, the door standing open to that cold draft, and I felt the bus take weight. You feel it as a driver before you see it, the suspension giving, the soft sink of a body's mass coming up the steps. By the time I'd lifted my head, he was already standing in the stairwell. I hadn't seen him cross the gravel. The headlights and the dome light both would have caught a man crossing that open ground. There was no car out there, no bicycle, no light of a farmhouse for miles. But there he was, an older man in a tan work jacket, the kind every man over 50 in that part of the state owns, a little worn at the cuffs and a steel lunch pail in one hand, the old domed kind, the kind my own father carried to the mill. Gray stubble, ordinary, so ordinary that for one full second my whole mind relaxed, because he was just a man, just some farmhand who'd missed his ride, and I had the fare line half formed in my mouth. It's $1.75, and the words wouldn't come, because he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at where I was. I don't know how else to put it. A man looks at you. This was the way you'd look at a window thinking about something on the far side of the glass. He was facing me, and I was not in front of him. Not really. And that small wrongness was worse than anything I could have seen on his face, because his face was just a tired man's face. The wrongness wasn't in him. It was in the space he stood in. The cold poured up the stairwell around him, and the radio was dead silent, and the dash clock was stuck on 3:53 and would not move. He went and sat down about halfway back on the right, and he set the lunch pail on his knees, and he turned and watched the dark go by the way a man watches it at the end of a long shift, and not one other passenger looked at him. That's the thing that took the longest to get all the way into me. There were 4 people aboard. Rochelle and Patty up front, a sleeping drunk in the back, and a young man with earphones in. And the second we pulled out of that turnout, every one of them who was awake went still and quiet and put their eyes down. Rochelle, who never shut up, went silent as a stone. Her knee was going up and down, and she was staring at her own folded hands like there was scripture written on them. They knew, the way Pruitt knew, the way the building knew. They knew not to look, and so I learned in that minute that the not looking was the oldest rule of all, older than the 4 minutes, older than the lights, a rule that didn't come from any sheet but from somewhere down in the body. I kept my eyes on the road. The dash clock came unstuck. The radio crackled back to life with a fragment of a hymn from some all-night gospel station, and I have never in my life been so glad to hear static and a stranger singing. He didn't get off at any stop. I want to be exact about this because it's the part that took me weeks to accept. I watched the mirror. He was there past Cochranton. He was there past the sheets. And somewhere on the long black pull before the county home, I glanced up and the seat was empty and the lunch pail was gone. And there had been no bell, no door, no settling of the suspension to mark a man's weight leaving. He simply stopped being a thing the bus was carrying. I pulled over. I think I said something out loud. I don't remember what. And Rochelle, without turning around, said in a flat, tired voice, "You're all right. You did it right." Lights low didn't talk to him. "You're all right, Walt." And then softer, almost to herself, "Some of the boys don't do it right." And she would not say one word more about it. Not that night, not ever, no matter how I asked her in the years after. She'd just shake her head and look out the window. There were things she'd decided a long time ago not to carry around awake, and I came to respect that, because I made the same decision about most of it myself. When I got back to the depot that morning, my hands were still not quite steady, and Pruitt was at the dispatch window doing his end-of-shift count, which he did every single night. though God knows the count never came out to anything that needed a man of his years awake at that hour. I set the manifest down. I didn't know how to start, so I just said somebody got on at the 350. He didn't look up. Tan jacket? Yeah. Lunch pail? Yeah. He nodded the way you'd nod at a weather report. That's the regular. And then he must have seen something in my face, because he set the drawer down, and he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and he said the longest thing he ever said to me in 11 years. He doesn't want anything off you, Walt. People get it twisted. They think a thing like that is hungry, or it's angry, or it's after them. It isn't. It's got somewhere it goes, and it's been going there a long, long time, longer than this depot's been standing. And that stop is just one of the places the road folds in a way that lets him get on. He's not riding to anywhere on your route. He's just riding through. You're a stretch of road to him, a piece of the dark. And the only trouble that ever comes, the only trouble there's ever been, is when a driver decides to be more than a piece of road. When a driver decides he needs to know something. I asked him what happened to those drivers. He picked the drawer back up. Go home, he said. Get some sleep. Tell Donna I said hello. And that was all I got that morning, but I'd notice over the years that whenever I came in shaken from a bad night, Pruitt would already be at the window, every time no matter the hour, like he never went home at all. Like the whole reason he was still alive and still, there was so that no driver would ever have to come back from that road to an empty building. I didn't understand that for a long while. I understand it now. There was a file room behind the dispatch office, and like everything in that building, it was a place the city had filled up and forgotten. They never threw away a piece of paper in their lives. One slow night, a fair dispute had me back there pulling a manifest from the spring, and while I was in the cabinets, I found the root binders for the 9 going back decades. Fat, cracked 3-ring binders with the years marked on the spines in faded grease pencil, and I will tell you that I shouldn't have opened them, and I will tell you that any man alive would have. The 350 was in everyone, going back as far as the paper went, into the 60s. The same gravel turnout described in the same handful of words by a dozen different hands. 350, turnout past Shelby, doors 4 men, lights low. The exact phrasing copied driver to driver to driver like a prayer whose words you keep even after the meaning's worn off them. And in the margins, in pencil, in the cramped, careful print of men long retired or dead, there were the notes. Most of them were nothing. Reg, aboard, no incident. No show reg. Aboard slept fine, year after year of it, the same reassurance written 10,000 times by men reassuring no one but themselves. There was something almost unbearable in it. All those hands, all those nights, all those tired men, driving the same dark stretch and writing the same 4 words so the next man would know it could be survived. But scattered through the years, maybe one every couple of years, there was a different kind of note, and the handwriting always seemed to go bad on those, the letters pressed too hard or trailing off. Reg spoke to Newman Esposito, C. Pruitt, and once just asked it. God help him, and in a binder from 91 in block letters underlined twice. Do not take the nightline if you cannot leave it be. And every single time, within a few pages of one of those notes, the name on the run sheet would change. A new man. There was one stretch in the 70s where the name changed 3 times in 5 months. 3 drivers gone off the run one after another, and after the third the notes went quiet and orderly for a long while. And I sat there in that file room and I understood that the quiet wasn't peace. The quiet was a man who'd learned to leave it be. I found one note I've never been able to forget. It wasn't even in a margin. Somebody had folded a piece of paper and tucked it into the rings of the 1984 binder, a half-page torn from a logbook, and on it a driver had written, "Not to dispatch, not for the record, just to whoever might find it." He looked at me tonight. I didn't ask. I swear to God I didn't ask. But he looked at me anyway, and I think he knows I want to. I don't want to anymore. Please, I don't want to know anymore. There was no name on it. I put it back exactly where it was. I never told Pruitt I'd seen it. Some things you find aren't yours to have found. I asked Pruitt about it once. Careful, like a man asking after another man's family. I told him I'd been in the binders and seen the names change after the time somebody talked to it. He got the tiredest I ever saw him, and he was quiet a long while, and then he told me about Esposito, the man who'd had the run before me. Esposito asked. Pruitt didn't say how, and I didn't push, but the way he told it, the man had been a good driver 20 years in, steady, nothing reckless about him. And one bad winter his wife had left and his boy wasn't speaking to him, and he was alone out there on that road every night with too much room in his head, and one night the want got bigger than the rule. He asked the regular where he goes, and the regular told him. Pruitt said Esposito drove 4 more nights after that, and then put in for a daytime run, and within a month he'd gone strange and quiet, stopped showing up, and the last anyone heard he was in a facility up near Erie, sitting in a chair by a window. telling the nurses he had a stop to make and he couldn't remember where it was, that he was late, that he was so late. They'd find him at the door some nights with his coat on, waiting for a bus. That's what it does, Pruitt said. It's not that the answer's frightening exactly. It's that the answer's true, and a living man can't hold a thing that true. It's like... And he stopped and worked his jaw and gave up trying to make me understand it with words. I keep the 350 on the schedule, he said instead, because here's the part nobody thinks through. If I take it off the sheet, he doesn't stop coming. I can't make him stop coming. All taking it off the sheet does is make it so nobody's expecting him. And an unexpected one of those is 100 times worse than a scheduled one. So we keep it on the book. We keep a driver on it who can leave it be. We keep the lights low and the doors 4 minutes and we never ask. And we manage it. That's the whole job, Walt. That was always the whole job. We don't fix it, we just keep it regular. And that was when I finally understood what the depot was. It wasn't a bus company with a strange stop on one of its routes. It was a thing that had grown up over half a century around a single unbearable fact, the way a tree grows around an old fence post until the post is buried somewhere deep inside the trunk, and the whole shape of the tree is just the record of having survived it. The schedule, the 4 minutes, the low lights, the 4 copied words. Pruitt sitting up every night doing a count that didn't need doing. All of it was procedure wrapped around the 350 to keep it bearable. Nobody was solving anything. There was nothing to solve. They were managing it one careful night at a time, the way Donna and I managed the dialysis. You don't beat a thing like that. You build your whole life into a shape that can carry it, and you call that shape your job or your marriage, and you get up the next night and you do it again. I'd like to say the years that followed were quiet, and mostly they were, but the procedure is only as strong as the people aboard, and people are people, and a few times it came close. There was a drunk one winter, a big red-faced man who'd gotten on at the sheets and would not settle, the loud, friendly kind of drunk that's one wrong word from being the other kind. We came up on the turnout, and the cold came up the steps, and the regular boarded and sat down, and before I could do a thing about it, the drunk turned around and saw him and said, too loud in that dead quiet bus, hey, buddy, you got a smoke?" And the whole bus went rigid. Rochelle wasn't aboard that night, but an old woman near the front made a sound like a held breath. I caught the drunk's eye in the mirror and I said, hard and level, the only thing I ever found that worked. Leave the man alone. He's had a long shift. Something about he's had a long shift. The drunk blinked, and something in his own fog seemed to recognize something, and he said, yeah, all right, and turned back around and didn't say another word, and he got off 2 stops later white as a sheet and wouldn't take my good night. The regular never reacted at all. He just rode his stretch and was gone before the county home. But I had the shakes for an hour after, because for 1 second the rule had nearly come apart in a stranger's loud, friendly mouth, and I'd seen how thin the thing we'd built really was. Worse than the drunk was the child. It was a young mother with a little boy, maybe 4 years old, riding through to her sister's in the next town because something had gone wrong at home. You didn't ask on the overnight, you just gave them the ride. The boy was awake when he had no business being, the way small children sometimes are. Bright-eyed and solemn in the dark, we came up on the turnout, the cold, the settling. The regular boarded and sat, and the mother had her eyes down like everyone learns to. But the boy turned around and looked right at him, and his little face did something I've never gotten out of my head. It didn't go scared, it went curious. He lifted one small hand and he waved, and he said in that clear carrying voice children have, "Mister, why's your lunchbox wet?" I didn't dare turn around. In the mirror I saw the regular, and for the first time in years of carrying him I saw him almost react. He turned his head a little toward the boy, just a little, and the mother, God bless her, she didn't know the rules, but she knew her boy. And she pulled him around into her lap and pressed his face into her coat and said, "Hush now, hush, we don't bother people." Her voice shaking, though she couldn't have told you why, and she held that boy's face down the whole rest of the ride. The regular turned back to the window, and he was gone before the county home like always. But I have wondered, all these years, about why's your lunchbox wet, because a child sees what's actually in front of him before the world teaches him not to. And I have decided that's one of the things I'm grateful not to know, and once it was the bus itself. A bad February, snow coming sideways, the road a white blur, and I was running on fumes after 3 nights of barely sleeping, because Donna had taken a turn and I'd been at the hospital, between shifts. I nearly missed the turnout entirely. The second bridge came up out of the snow before I expected it, and I had to brake hard on the gravel and slew the back end around, and I was so rattled and so tired. I opened the doors and started my count. And somewhere in those 4 minutes, think I closed my eyes, just for a second, just a man at the end of his rope, and when I opened them, the dash clock read 3:54, and the doors were trying to close on their own and wouldn't. They'd jam, retract, jam again, like something was standing in the way of them, and the cold was pouring in worse than ever, and I had the worst feeling of my life that I had let the 4 minutes run long, that I had broken the count, that something was deciding whether I'd been a piece of road or something more. I hauled that door lever with both hands and said out loud to no one, "I'm sorry, I'm done, that's the 4 minutes. I'm done," and the doors sucked shut, and the cold went out of the bus all at once, and I sat there in the falling snow and shook. I never told Pruitt about closing my eyes. It's the only thing about those years I was ever ashamed of, and I'm telling you now only because Donna's gone, and there's no one left for it to hurt. Then they gave me Darnell. He came on a few winters before I retired, a kid of maybe 23, and he took the overnight for the same reason I had, which was the only reason anybody ever took it, the money and a baby on the way. He showed me her picture his first night, his wife, a girl with a wide, bright smile, and the little grainy ultrasound printout he kept folded in his shirt pocket like a man keeps a holy card. A girl, they'd found out. He'd already named her in his head. He wouldn't tell me the name because he said it was bad luck before she came, but you could see he carried it around like a warm coal. He was scared of the job in the good way, the careful way. He checked his mirrors twice. He woke the sleeping drunks gentle. He was going to be one of the good ones, and I told him so, and he flushed like I'd given him money. Pruitt put him with me for a week of training, same as anybody, and I did with him exactly what Pruitt had done with me on my first night. I ran my thumb down the route sheet, I named the stops, and when I got to the bottom, to the 350 with its blank where a place should be, I told him the words. Doors 4 minutes by the dash clock, lights on the low setting, no fare, no questions, eyes down if you can manage it, and whatever you do, however bad you want to, you do not ask him where he goes. You write regular aboard, no incident, and you drive. He looked at me the way I'd once looked at Pruitt, like I was an old man with a superstition he was too polite to laugh at. Didn't try to convince him. There's no convincing. There's only the turnout and the cold coming up the steps, and the suspension settling under the weight of something that didn't cross the gravel. I figured he'd learn it the only way any of us learned it. He came aboard on Darnell's third training night. The clock hesitated. The radio went dead. The cold poured up the steps, and the suspension sank, and I watched the kid go rigid in the jump seat beside me, his whole young body locking up, and I watched him put his eyes down the way I'd told him to, and I was proud of him. He was doing the hard, simple thing. The regular sat halfway back with his lunch pail on his knees, and the few passengers we had went quiet and small, and it was going fine. It was going to be fine, but Darnell was 23, his wife was 8 months along. He was about to be a father in a country that doesn't make that easy on a young man with no money, and he was out here in the enormous dark carrying a thing he couldn't understand and couldn't tell his wife about and couldn't make sense of in any shape his young life had given him. And I think I've had years to think about it. I think he needed in that moment for there to be an answer, for the universe to be the kind of place, if you were brave enough to ask, you'd be told, and the telling would make it bearable. That's not foolishness. That's the most human thing there is. It's the thing that's gotten men through wars. It just happened to be, on that one night, the worst possible thing to be. Past Cochranton, in the deepest part of the dark, I heard him take a breath that wasn't a sleeping breath, and before I could say his name, the kid turned around in his seat, and he looked back at the man in the tan jacket, and he quiet, almost gentle, the way you'd ask a tired old-timer at the end of a shift, "Where do you go, mister?" And the man turned his head and looked at him. I saw it in the mirror. After all those years of carrying him, of him looking at where I was and never at me, I saw him turn and fix on that boy and look directly, fully, a living look out of a face that I will not describe because I've spent years keeping it out of my own head, and I'll not put it in yours. And he answered, I couldn't hear the words. The engine was loud, and I have thanked God for that engine every night since, because I didn't hear a syllable of it, but I could see the boy's face while he listened, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Darnell stopped blinking. His breathing changed, went shallow and then stopped, like a man underwater, and then started again all wrong, too even, like he was being breathed instead of breathing. And his face, his young, scared good face, it changed the way a window changes when the frost crawls across it from the inside, the way water changes when it remembers how to be ice. He looked like a man who had just remembered something that hadn't happened yet, something that couldn't be remembered and couldn't be forgotten and couldn't be held. And his mouth moved, and I leaned toward him, and the only words I caught, the only words he said the whole rest of that ride were so quiet I've never been sure I heard them right. He said, That's not a place. And then even quieter just before he faced front again and went still. I don't think I know how to get back from there. The regular turned back to the window. He was gone before the county home, the same as always, the lunch pail gone with him. No bell, no door, no weight leaving the seat. And Darnell sat beside me the rest of the run, not blinking, not speaking. His hands open in his lap and the little folded ultrasound peeking out of his shirt pocket. And I drove us home through the dark, and I did not know one single thing to do for him, because there was nothing. There has never been anything. That was always the point. He turned in his manifest at the depot. He'd written, in a hand much shakier than his, regular aboard, no incident, which was the kindest lie that boy ever told. And he went home to his pregnant wife, and he never came back to the depot. And Pruitt put in the paperwork without a word and never met my eye while he did it. I didn't ask where Darnell ended up. I already knew it'd be some version of Esposito, a young man somewhere with his coat on by a door, certain he's late for a stop, unable to recall its name because it doesn't have a name, it has a time. And his little girl was born that spring to a father who was there in the room, and not in the room, and I have never been able to make myself find out the rest, because some not knowings are the only mercy a man's got left to give. I drove the route alone again after that, 4 more years, until my own body gave out the way bodies do. I never spoke to the regular again, and he never spoke to me, and we carried each other through the dark, like 2 tired men who've agreed not to ask each other any questions, the passenger and the piece of road, neither one needing a thing from the other. Donna passed the spring before my last winter. The dialysis had bought us 9 years past what they'd first told us, and I have never once been sorry for the 80 cents or the lost sleep, because every one of those nights paid for a morning where she was still in the kitchen, making the coffee she wasn't supposed to drink, and a man would drive 1,000 years of overnights for that. After she was gone, the bus was almost a comfort. The dark out there was the same dark, and the regular was as faithful a passenger as I ever had, more faithful than my own knees. And there was a stretch where I think the only thing on this earth that still expected me at a particular hour was a thing that boarded at 3:50 and asked nothing of me but that I keep the lights low and leave it be. I never told a living soul that the loneliest thing in my life had become a small relief, but it had. When I retired, they had a little thing for me in the break room. Sheet cake from the sheets. The same vending machine still eating dollars in the corner. Pruitt was 2 winters gone by then. He'd had a stroke at the dispatch window. They found him in the morning with the cash drawer open and the count half done. And I've always hoped it took him quick, and I've always wondered if any driver came in shaken that night to an empty window for the first time in 50 years. The new dispatcher was a woman named Halverson, sharp and young and efficient, and when she shook my hand, she held it a beat too long and said, "Thank you for keeping it regular." Not the root it. And I knew right then that she'd read the binders too, that the thing had a new guardian, and I went home thinking the procedure was in good hands. The new schedule came out this March, and the 350 isn't on it. I called the depot just once, an old man making a nuisance of himself. Halverson took the call. I asked her about the nightline. There was a long quiet on the other end, the kind of quiet I knew the shape of. She said they'd contracted that whole lower stretch out to a regional carrier the year before, that the 9 didn't run past Cochranton anymore, that the turnout past the Shelby grain place wasn't on anybody's sheet now, wasn't anybody's stop, wasn't anybody's job. She said it like she'd been waiting for someone to call and ask, like she'd been dreading it, like saying it out loud made it true in a way she'd been holding off. And then, before she hung up, she told me the thing that put the stone in my chest where it's been sitting every night since. She said, "He still comes, Walt. There's just no bus there to expect him anymore." So I think about it now. I can't help it. My body won't let me. I think about the corn out past the second bridge, taller than a man, dead still even when the wind is up. I think about the gravel turnout with its leaning reflector post and no headlights falling on it anymore. No low yellow dome light. No 4 minutes counted off a dash clock. No tired man in a seat with his eyes carefully down. I think about a thing that has somewhere it goes, that for 50 years had a scheduled ride, and a careful man who knew the rules, arriving now at 3:50 in the morning to an empty pull-off on a road the buses don't run, unexpected with nowhere to get on. And I remember what Pruitt told me my first night and again near his last, that the trouble only ever comes when something stops being expected. I don't know what that means out there now, with no bus and no driver and no 4 words written in a book. I don't know what it does. A thing like that when the road folds open at 3:50, and there's nothing there to carry it through. Maybe it waits. Maybe it walks. Maybe it goes looking for the place it used to be able to count on. I keep my doors locked. I tell myself that's just an old man's habit. I'm 70 now, and I don't drive at night anymore. And there's no reason on God's earth for me to be awake at 3:40 in the morning. But I am, every morning. A bed with too much room in it, Donna's side cold and made up neat the way she'd never once left it when she was living. And the count starts on its own, 4 minutes long, and at the end of it something in my chest closes like a door, and I lie there in the dark of a quiet house, and I feel the old turnout pulling at me the way the moon pulls water. And I'll tell you the worst thing in this whole story, the thing I've never said to anyone. It isn't that it rode with me all those years. It isn't even that it's out there now with no ride. The worst thing is that I miss it. I miss being expected. I miss being a stretch of somebody's road. There were 11 years where, whatever else was true, at 3:50 in the morning I had somewhere to be and something that counted on my being there. And now Donna's gone and the root's gone and Pruitt's gone and I am an old man who isn't expected anywhere by anything, living or otherwise. And some nights that's the loneliest fact in the world. So I keep the porch light on, all night, every night, the bulb out front burning over an empty step. I tell the neighbors it's for the moths. I tell myself it's a habit, it's the cost of the electric, it's nothing. But I think the truth is simpler and worse than that. I think some part of me, the part that drove that road 11 years and learned its every seam, is keeping a light on at the door, the way the depot kept its stop on the schedule. Not because anyone's coming, because if something out there is still looking for a place that expects it, still arriving at 3:50 to a dark that used to have a bus in it, I'd rather it find my light than not. I'd rather be a stretch of road again, even now, even for that. It's been quiet so far. The light just burns and the moths come and the morning always gets here eventually. But I leave it on. I'll leave it on as long as I'm able. And when I'm gone, I suppose the bulb will burn out on its own some night with nobody left to change it, and the step will go dark, and there'll be one less light in this part of the country that's expecting anything at all. I hope to God it doesn't notice.